Good morning, everyone. My name is Cheryl Koehn. I'm the founder and president of Arthritis Consumer Experts, and we're here at the 2018 Canadian Rheumatology Association and Allied Health Professions Association annual meeting, where all of the science in rheumatology, and when I say rheumatology, I mean science for people with arthritis, that's sort of the lay way of putting it, is presented every year. And we're so happy to have Dr. Mark Harrison, who's a health economist centered at the University of British Columbia. He's an assistant professor there and works at crunching numbers in arthritis and looking at arthritis and what happens to people like us, our Facebook and Twitter Live audience, Mark, looking at us really from, I don't want this to sound impersonal, but from a quantitative perspective, so that along with the psychosocial, psycho-emotional parameters, we also can look at really the numbers behind those things and what happens to us in our journey with disease. So we're super happy to have Mark with us. And I think we have some technical issues here. So just hang on 2 seconds.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. That's our producer, Anita, in the background saying we're good. So welcome. We're really happy to have you here. And you actually just came from behind the podium. We've literally stolen you and brought you into the studio to talk about the work that you just presented around prevention in RA, which is going to really tantalize, I think, our viewing audience. So tell us about the project.
Yeah, so this was a project where we know at the moment that there's a lot of excitement about whether we can actually prevent rheumatoid arthritis. There's a lot of work looking at how good we are at predicting who will get the disease, and then there's ongoing trials as well of different treatments that may or may not sort of switch off the disease at this very, very early stage. Yeah. What we wanted to know actually was just sort of going beyond that. There's an assumption underlying that work that people would be willing to take drugs at an asymptomatic stage to try and prevent a disease that they may or may not ever get.
So taking something before they even have symptoms.
Before they even have symptoms, yeah. So these trials are kind of either at the very sort of early asymptomatic stage or very early symptoms. Well, we thought that was a big assumption, and what we wanted to do was kind of look into the crystal ball, I guess, and see, are people actually going to take these treatments in practice? So what that involved was taking a method that market researchers use. So if we're launching a new iPhone in market research, they would try and understand what drives people's preferences. Once we know what those preferences are, how can we use that information to try and see whether people will buy a product?
So it's like kind of Apple creating the rose gold case.
It's almost exactly like that.
Yeah,
so,
I see.
So you'll have a bunch of different features that you have in the phone, and we need to know how those drive value, I guess, and how that will drive the purchasing decision.
Okay.
So to kind of convert that method to healthcare, we partner with people like Arthritis Consumer Experts and the Joint Health Group. And throughout the whole project, we're trying to understand, okay, what are the key features of treatment decisions from your perspective?
Yeah.
And how do those factor into the decision of whether you would take a treatment or not? Once we can sort of characterise those key features, we ask people. So we asked members, so you were super helpful in recruiting
Our
people.
pleasure.
Yeah, and so thank you for the members who...
Actually, thank our audience, because they're largely
who...
coming from our membership, and their keen interest in learning.
Yeah.
So.
And there was quite an involved role in your partners as well. So we asked patients themselves to actually undertake the survey and then actually help us with the referral process.
So focus group sort of work.
Focus group work, like throughout the continuum of the research. So
yeah.
Focus group work was where we developed the project, and that was heavily involved with the consumer experts group. And then in terms of actually getting the responses back for the questionnaire, people were filling out these questionnaires and then passing them on to first-degree relatives, so trying to replicate possibly an at-risk population.
Well, that's a really, I personally was very glad to see the involvement of that first-degree family member, because particularly in the autoimmune types of arthritis, our families not only play an important support role, but they influence us. And I think that is a really important piece underlying this whole prevention notion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know myself, when I was first diagnosed, I pursued a whole line of sort of unorthodox, let's just put it that way, treatment because my peers influenced me,
Yeah.
not really because it was my choice. So I was really glad to see that component in the research.
Yeah, and those focus groups, they're quite humbling actually to go to, because like we think we know things,
Yeah.
and then you go to these groups and you hear people's experiences, and it kind of just blows things apart.
Yeah.
And we realise we know nothing.
Well,
So-
and thank Dr. Harrison and his colleagues for admitting they know nothing when it comes to walking in our shoes with arthritis. I think you're humbled, but we also thank you for that, because it is that true essence of arthritis shining through in these research projects, I think, that make them more relevant, frankly speaking, to not just us, but to your colleagues. When you can point to the fact that the center of design and the analysis and the meaningfulness of the results really were, in part driven by people living with the disease, I think that we put the gold medal on your research.
Yeah, and I think the kind of methods we do,
Yeah.
they mean nothing if we don't have that input at that stage. So we have to go through that process to make it valid in any case.
Yeah.
And I think the results coming out are really exciting.
So what were they? That's the
Yeah.
punchline here are the results.
So the context was, at the moment, people are studying hydroxychloroquine for like asymptomatic people, and then there's a range of other drugs. There's methotrexate, there's abatacept, rituximab, and some statins for people with very early sort of arthralgia. What we're finding is that, first of all, in terms of what's important to people, that the risk reduction isn't the most important thing. Like
Really?
Safety comes through. And also this shared decision-making angle. So people who are going to go onto these treatments really want to know what's best from the perspective of their healthcare professional.
So the doctor, what they think is very important to us.
Yeah, and likewise, when healthcare professionals are making that decision, they really want to know what you think. But interestingly, like the order of preferences for preventive treatments varies between those groups. So it suggests that we need to be really much more structured in trying to understand where the other person's coming from in that decision.
So
and
communication.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and then building on those, so once we know what's driving people's preferences, if we look at what we think would be the uptake of these drugs that are currently under trial, hydroxychloroquine seems to be the one that ticks the most boxes. So that seems to be the one that people would like to take. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we don't get a lot of support for biologics in this setting, so perhaps people just aren't
As a preventative.
treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe they're just
Government would like that because they're very expensive, and hydroxychloroquine is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the messages we're taking out from this project is that it's really important to, before you start undertaking these trials, is to really understand what people want and try and build that in a very early stage. And I think this method is great.
I think it's spot on because, one, everyone operates with limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
That's no more true in research than anywhere else. Actually, there's so little money spent, given the burden of arthritis in the world, and of course including Canada. We had a very small piece of the research pie, so if you're going to do studies like this in prevention, you may as well narrow the focus on what preferences people actually who are engaged in these kinds of trials, what it is they're willing or not to do.
Yeah, and I think there's numerous examples of trials that completed and haven't changed clinical practice. Yeah,
right.
So I think this is perhaps a way of supporting people who are designing trials and trying to get actually treatments that are likely to go well in reality to be prioritised at that stage.
What was sort of another aha result for you?
An aha result?
Yeah, like something that sort of went, oh my goodness, I never imagined. I mean, if there was one.
No, there was. I mean, there's plenty of them. So when we're designing the key features, the things that you expect to come up. So you kind of have this expectation that the risk reduction is going to be the most important thing. But I think one thing we've found consistently coming through is like how important the quality of evidence that we have is in decision making. So in this study as well as other studies, it's coming through almost as important as the risks and benefits of the treatment itself.
Okay.
So,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, so people are really dialed into how good the evidence is. People really worry that they're being guinea pigs for certain treatments, and they want to know that the things are sort of have a solid evidence base.
And when you, coming back to the communication piece,
Yeah.
you know, you can have a mountain of evidence, but if your healthcare provider and you don't either have all that evidence at hand or communicate the evidence in maybe a less effective way, it doesn't matter how much evidence is there. If the communication piece is broken,
Yeah.
then the whole thing kind of falls apart, I think anyway.
Yeah, and I think through the process of going through the focus groups as well, we've really realised how important that communication piece is, not only to the experiments that we're doing, so we need to be able to communicate. We find out what the key features are, but then we need to be able to communicate those effectively and quickly as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of opened up a whole branch of research in how do we communicate risk well, and there's a lot of literature out there, but it's building all the time. But also this uncertainty piece, so there's kind of two components to risk. So there's something might happen in the future,
Yeah.
but then how certain are we that that event might happen? So there's kind of two orders to the risk.
Okay.
And that second part, the uncertainty, has been ignored quite a lot. So that's been a eureka moment for us.
A eureka moment. I love that. Very quickly before we wrap up, what's on the horizon for Dr. Mark Harrison and company? Because you obviously, research is not done in a vacuum. It's not done by one person. Usually it's done by a team. So what are you and your team sort of thinking of?
We're looking at, we're sort of moving on this area of preferences to try and see how we can use that preference elicitation sort of mechanism to try and focus patient-oriented research. So how we can better position trials to answer questions that are really important to patients.
Okay.
And
you don't just mean drug trials. You mean
this
studies of all type.
Any sort of study in the healthcare.
Yeah. So what you've done is this experiment, this discrete choice experiment that we've just completed and you've presented, you're saying is sort of a model for the way other projects can be done.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fantastic.
And that's kind of methodological, but it will have, I think, really important implications for practice as well. And then the other thing we're looking at, like down the other end of the spectrum, so I'm really interested in interactions between patients and healthcare professionals. So we're also looking at incentives to try and improve quality of care for patients in the province. So BC has quite a unique code which allows rheumatologists to bill for nurse time to see patients. Which
is fabulous, by the way, audience, and we're trying to advocate for that code right across Canada. We think nursing is a critical piece of rheumatology care.
Yeah, so we'll be spending the next few years looking at how that code's impacted on patient care, what's been enabled by that fee code.
Right.
And hopefully, as you say, use it as an example for the rest of Canada.
Yeah, and towards getting it better.
Yeah.
Like, so just because you're doing it now doesn't necessarily you're doing it entirely well, and figuring out where maybe things can be improved or where you're already spending enough time or money in a particular care area.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a static thing, so we'll see how well it's working, and then we'll look for areas of opportunities as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're so happy that you came in, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. Do we have any questions at the moment? Please, Facebook and Twitter audience, if you have any questions, bring them on in. Mark is always available to us to answer questions, and if in fact you don't have any now, you can post them at any point. This video, of course, will live on our Facebook channel, and we invite you to invite your friends to view it to learn more about the great work of Dr. Mark Harrison. So thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
So we do have a further question. Do you have any focus groups coming up?
Not immediately scheduled, but we will have focus groups. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that's been a great part of the partnership with ACE and Joint Health is that when we have focus groups coming up, that's how we try and recruit. So yeah, we will have them coming up, no doubt.
Yeah, fantastic. So if you want to sort of pre-identify yourself as someone interested in research, there's a couple of places you can go, but certainly shooting us an email to feedback@jointhealth.org. You can just send us a quick email saying, I'm interested in Dr. Mark Harrison's research work or work of its kind, and we'll make certain to include you on the list that we send out when a project is in the recruiting phase. So thank you so much for your interest. It's actually the altruism of people who currently have arthritis that is helping researchers and our partners in research advance the knowledge in our disease area. So it's really, participation is critical.
Yeah.
You can't do your work without us.
We can't do the work without you, and
Yeah.
we have, I think one of the strengths of the work we've had through working with you is that we've had people respond from all across Canada, so we know that the results are representative, and it's really good to sort of reach people that I couldn't have done without you. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. It's the audience that we couldn't do without, so we're really happy that you joined us, and please come back. We have another interview shortly following this one.